go. Rich Witucki is a principal industrial consultant at Dragos, where he works with the professional services team in conducting network and vulnerability assessments. Prior to joining the company, Rich worked for Schneider Electric, where he was responsible for reviewing customers' industrial control systems architectures and making recommendations to help secure their systems. And previously, Rich worked as a principal engineering consultant focused on operational technologies and managed a group of software engineers at a large ICS systems integrator. So in short, Rich knows what he's talking about, and he's going to make an entrance from the back of the room up to here right now. So everybody give him a hand.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you enjoyed lunch, and I hope I keep you awake throughout the, at least for the next hour or so. All right, so today's topic is obviously OT cybersecurity, and I want to get into a retrospective of the adversary, and why should we really care about what the adversary is doing and the new developments that are out there? Again, this is me, quick introduction, Rich Witucki. I've been with Dragos for about 3 years, and my background really is in operations, so I've done a lot with system integrator. Me and 4 other guys owned our own company, system integration company, for about 5 years, had its ups and downs, decided to get out of there when I had my third child. Actually, my wife decided for me to get out of there after I had my third child. And that's where I ended up with these other companies. So really enjoy this. This is my flight yesterday. Everybody knows that when you die, you have to go through Atlanta, right? Well, apparently I had to go through twice. We had an emergency landing, so we get halfway here, and they send me back to Atlanta. I couldn't quite figure that out. It was one of those. The cargo door isn't closed, so we're going back to Atlanta. It was just a faulty sensor, but I guess better safe than sorry. So the OT threats are more frequent and sophisticated today than they have been in the future. If you look back all the way at the left-hand side there, you'll see that between 1998 and 2008, there was really a lack of collection on what was going on inside the OT environment. So were there incidents that were occurring? Sure, there were incidents that are occurring, but nobody really understood what those might be. Nobody understood who might be inside your environment itself. Most of the information that I'm going to go over today is based on our insights and our customers. It's a pretty large data set, but nevertheless, it's going to be somewhat collection bias. But at least we are collecting the information. So if we look back at the early 2000s, you probably heard of Operation Aurora and the APT-1 campaign. This is really associated at that time with industrial control systems. Nobody thought it was associated with industrial control systems, but as we look back, we see that the adversary was in the environment, was compromising manufacturing facilities. They were taking intellectual property out. It was basically an espionage and one of those advanced persistent threats. Around 2009 to 2014, some headlines were made with the Stuxnet and associated campaigns, and Sandworm. Of course, at that point in time, when Stuxnet and Sandworm came out, it hit the public. There were books written about it, and now it became a common word. 60 Minutes and 2020 were all doing programs that were highlighting it, and eventually everything. Anytime somebody would turn a switch off or there was a lightning strike and you'd lose power, that was a cybersecurity event, right? According to the media. So as the general public becomes more interested in what's going on and looking at the infrastructure, we start to see some other things happen. back in 2000, roughly 2015, or no, just before 2015, 2010 timeframe, we saw the Ukraine and Germany attacks on civilian infrastructure. That was a first of its kind. And then in 2015 to 2020 is really when we started to see detection and visibility as part of the market start to really grow. Companies, companies started adopting these different platforms, which allowed more visibility into their environments. And we started seeing more things being compromised just because there was more activity in that space. For example, we mentioned the Ukraine attacks on 2016 and 2015, and other similar campaigns that were out there stealing intellectual property. Moving on to 2015 to 2020, we saw the actual first attack on a safety system, which is the Triconics attack. One thing to notice about the Triconics attack, it was very specific, right? I mean, if they were going after anyone else, they could not reuse that same attack to go into someone's utilities or facility or environment here inside North America, just because it was extremely specific. They were in their network for a very long time, and they learned a lot about what was going on. And then 220 to 221, as we start to mature and we have these different heterogeneous environments. Everything is really different. We are starting to see more of a homogeneous environment. You see it in manufacturing, where they have the different initiatives like IIoT, the Industrial Internet of Things, Factory 4.0, and everybody is starting to digitize their systems. And this has happened throughout. And we're also seeing the threat actors increasingly become better at what they're doing. They're developing these new tools like pipe dream that they can use to attack different control systems. And why that's important, one of the reasons that's important is because as we move forward, we're going to see more and more attacks on our infrastructure, and obviously it's been increasing over time. Over the last 2 years, we saw 21 unique threat groups, so these have been increasing over time, and these are the threat groups that Dragos is following at the moment. So the 21 threat groups that we track, that we designate as threat groups, they have to have a couple things. One, they have to have demonstrated that they have an ICS OT specific capability or offensive capability, and the threat group has to demonstrate a pattern of targeting organizations because of either industrial or because they have some kind of OT. And as you can see, there's roughly between 2 to 4 new groups that have been identified each year. When Dragos and anyone else for that matter identifies a threat group, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's when the activity began. It just means that that's when they were actually defined to be a threat group. We also track which threat groups are remaining active. So as you can see from this slide, there's 10 threat groups that have shown consistent capabilities over the years and that are still actively targeting new organizations today. If I go back all the way to 2017, you see that Electrum, that group is on there. And this is a really good example of a group that was involved early on. They kind of come in and out. When they show different activity, they'll disappear for a while and they'll come back in. But this was the group that was responsible for the 2016 power outages in the Ukraine. And we still see them today developing their capabilities, doing recon, and choosing their targets. This shows you the sort of long-term nature of some of the threats that we face. And we're going to look at several of these threat groups, but our main focus in terms of threat groups will be the new threat groups that came out this year on the right-hand side, specifically Ganonite, Voltsite, and Lorionite that you see on the far right. Two of these groups heavily rely on, all three of the groups got their initial access from internet exposed assets, and two of these groups use living off the land techniques. Before I get into the details though, I'm going to discuss kind of the evolution of the threat landscape and the new trends that we've seen since 2023. So throughout 2023, we see this conflict-driven cyber activity. There's these global conflicts that have really fueled an increase in the overall level of cyber activity, including activity associated with Dragos threat groups, extensive activity associated with ransomware groups, and operations performed by hacktivists. So there's kind of three categories that are pretty unique. The troubling thing is that traditional kinetic warfare is increasingly intersecting with a focus on cyber capabilities. And the combination of this is pretty scary. It could have really devastating consequences. Effectively, what we've seen is sophisticated cyber adversaries with a range of capabilities using the Ukraine-Russia war and the Israel-Hamas wars to conduct targeted operations against numerous critical infrastructure organizations. Unfortunately, it doesn't stop here because less sophisticated activists have also taken advantage of these same conflicts to cause panic and negatively impact the public perception. This is especially in the resilience or the underlying critical infrastructure. The Ukraine-Russia conflict continues to drive up activity of several of the more mature threat groups. And you'll see Electrum and Kamosite, which are up there. They continue to target different cyber operations against Ukrainian critical infrastructure. Electrum's offensive operations include the deployment of destructive malware, such as wipers, which I'll talk about in detail a little bit later on, in addition to tailored spear phishing campaigns. And in each one of those cases, they were targeting the Ukraine and critical infrastructure in the Ukraine. Another key theme of this conflict-driven threat landscape as a whole is not the current wars that we have and the kinetic activity that's going on, but it's the mounting tension between China and Taiwan and China and the United States. And I want you to just keep that in the back of your head, because as we go through the different threat groups, we're going to show how that's kind of taking on a more active role. According to multiple sources, the political dynamic contributes to an increase in targeted espionage-based attacks against multiple industrial organizations. These include both the Asia-Pacific region and also the United States. As part of the activity, one particular threat group really stands out, and that's Voltsite. Voltsite has targeted numerous critical infrastructure entities in the APAC, the United States, and other countries since at least 2021. They show a continued interest in electric and communication sectors in the United States, and most of these indications so far that Voltsite is leveraging hard-to-detect techniques such as living off the land. One of the things that this is showing you is Voltsite has very persistent access. Once they get in, they tend to stay in, and they're really slow about what they're doing, but they don't want to get knocked out, so they have persistent access throughout. They're important to them is exfiltrating your data and then disrupting operations. You'll notice that's a dotted line. That's what we think is future activity. So much like the Ukraine-Russia war, conflicts erupting in the Middle East, namely the Israeli-Hamas war, were accompanied by cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. But we also saw a significant increase of activist attacks. These activist attacks were tied to some of these global campaigns. In more of a traditional sense, hacktivists is effectively the use of cyber offensive operations or hacking in support of certain political, civil, social, or environmental causes. Generally speaking, hacktivist groups have employed more trivial or basic attacks against the targets. Think of things like DDoS attacks, website defacement, or even spreading false claims of intrusions, and we've seen all of that going on. These attacks are used to spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and ultimately to influence perceptions. They try to create that false narrative of instability. Again, hacktivists typically perform their actions in support of a certain cause. It's no surprise that we see an increase in politically motivated hacktivist activity during these recent periods of global conflict. One of the things that you'll notice here is that on the left-hand side, we have activists that are motivated by the Ukraine-Russia war. On the right-hand side, we have those that are motivated by Israeli-Hamas conflict. And Anonymous Sudan and Killnet kind of flip-flopped on these. So at one point in time, they were targeting the Ukraine, and then at another point in time, they were targeting the U.S. or Israel. So it's interesting how these groups are moving around. A little bit that has to do with trying to disrupt what's going on, the whole fear, uncertainty, and doubt. This you can see on the last one, the Cyber Army of Russia Reborn. There's one example of a group that's attacking industrial organizations in Europe, and you can imagine that that's probably a Russian-based group, right? But then Anonymous Sudan was also pro-Russian, and they moved over, and now more motivated by the Israeli-Hamas conflict. One of these groups, though, should really be highlighted, and that group is the Cyber Avengers. So this group, the Hamas group Cyber Avengers, was able to achieve stage 2 of the ICS cyber kill chain. And what they did was they were targeting the Unitronics PLCs, these are the PLCs coming out of Israel, and as you can see there, one of their comments is, every equipment made in Israel is Cyber Avengers' illegal target. The problem with this is they also compromised systems in North America at the same time. And you can see early November as they started doing this, they compromised the Aliquippa Municipal Water Plant in Pennsylvania. Probably not as important, the Pint Beer Brewery in Pittsburgh. Might be important to some of us. And then the Aris Island water scheme. So 180 residents were without running water for 2 days. And this was all, quote, by accident. Probably the biggest takeaway, though, from this is what they did was really simple. They were using unsophisticated means, specifically using default credentials, and brute forcing to gain initial access, and then likely abused native functionality to achieve their intended effect. So native living off the land to achieve their intended effect, and it really demonstrates kind of the weak controls and underscores the potential for high impact consequences in the ICS environments. The attack took minimal skill to do, and they were successful in doing it. And one of the big things that we're seeing now is kind of the living off the land. This is a big trend that we've seen adopted by some of the adversaries, and these are usually the ones that want to stay in your environment for a long time, specifically VoltSide and Electrum. On the right-hand side, you can see some of the left-hand side, you can see the different groups that we've highlighted using these techniques. On the right-hand side, This is also some of the ransomware groups and some of the techniques that they're using to live off the land. So when I say living off the land, I'm really referring to what are typically pre-existing or legitimate or native capabilities within your environment. So these can be tools and protocols that are actually present on the victim's host or network computers, things like PowerShell, or to be used, or to enumerate the host, or do host discovery for lateral movement, that type of thing. And then, if you look at the right-hand side, you'll see these are results from Drago's professional services doing penetration tests. So we frequently see the adversaries using native tools like PowerShell to perform enumeration and host discovery, using things like PSExec or Windows Management Instrumentation command line, and they're doing this for lateral movement. But we use those same tools inside our pen tests, and you know, if somebody got into your environment and started using this, they could further use scheduled tasks to gain persistence, and maybe they'll do some kind of command and control using SSH or run DLL 32. So all those tools are already in your environment. And a lot of times the techniques by the adversaries, they'll use very specific tools that they've crafted to gain a certain aspect of your network. We talked about ransomware too. So ransomware is a big deal. It's a financial thing. We don't necessarily track any threat groups that are specifically ransomware. That we just see a lot of information when we do assessments. One of the things that's important to take away from this slide is that ransomware attacks have increased by 50%. And probably the other thing that I want you to take away is, even though these things have increased by 50%, most of it's in manufacturing, and to me, that's understandable. Manufacturing has a lot going on. I can go into a manufacturing facility, especially things like consumer goods or where they're making equipment, and when I look at that facility, they can have different controllers, for instance, different PLCs on different machines on the exact same line. And one line that produces an identical product might have different systems on it from another line. So there's this very heterogeneous type of systems that are out there, and there's not a lot of segmentation, which is one of the biggest reasons why there's ransomware. So, you know, people have firewall rules that are kind of lax, or there's lack of segmentation. People are getting through, and they're starting to come in there and take advantage of that. And this, if you look at this one, it's unbelievable how many different ransomware variants there are. So, you know, over 900 attacks using 50 different ransomware variants. This is from our year in review. 28%, that's an increase in 28% from 2022. And the one advice that I want you to take away is, don't go chasing every indicator of compromise. Don't be looking at every ransomware variant. It'll just eat up too much time, and it's not possible to do. Instead, understand what's in your ICS environment, what makes up your, make use of the techniques and procedures in the MITRE ATT&CK ICS framework, really important. This will help you understand those adversaries. And by understanding just a few of those TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures associated with things like lateral movement and things that ransomware they're going to do, if you understand that and you monitor for that, and you look for that, you'll understand most of what variants are out there. You'll understand the behavior, and you'll be able to identify it. My last one on ransomware attacks. This is to point out on the left-hand side, you had attacks, ransomware attacks like ECANs, which actually had tools out there that could shut your processes down. That was an issue. The other issue would be, the other issue that's starting to happen now is not only are they ransoming your system, they're taking your intellectual property and they're spitting that intellectual property out, so they're exfiltrating that data, and they're selling that data or reusing that data. That's the other thing that you have to look out for. So real quick, is anybody familiar with the SANS 5 ICS cybersecurity critical controls? So this is a great place to start, because OT security program can be really challenging, and the challenge can be daunting. I would say use this framework. It's really good. On the right-hand side, these are the reports with findings that we saw. So people lack of an ICS incident response plan, 38% of our customers showed that. Didn't have a defensible architecture, 46%. ICS network monitoring visibility, 61%. Secure remote access, 29% did not have secure remote access. They had vendors or other people coming in from the outside and through different paths. And a risk-based vulnerability management program, kind of lack of that. So I won't go into details on this, but you can download a couple of white papers from SANS that are really good regarding this topic. And we can also provide more information if you go to dragos.com. But I will talk about these 5 CCs in terms of the different threat groups that we have. And I'm only going to focus on these 6 different threat groups. Sorry, I went through that pretty fast, but that should come through pretty quick. So VoltSite was initially reported by the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency and by Microsoft. Volt Typhoon is what they called it in May of 2023. They're performing a reconnaissance and enumeration of multiple U.S.-based electric companies and also targeting Africa, Southeast Asia, et cetera. If you look right in the middle, this shows the kill chain that they had and the capabilities associated with it. So this group, as you can see, when you get to the exploit stage, they were really big on living off the land. And they would use native Windows commands and open source tools. And then when they needed a specific tool, they might download it. So like the open source fast reverse proxy tool, so they could exfiltrate data. And so what we're seeing here is a very, very sophisticated activity group that's getting into many of the different systems that are out there. And this is mostly based in North America, and North America and Guam, for that matter. And if I look at specifically how they went hunting for VoltSite, so this is something that we did. We were hunting for VoltSite in kind of a case study. In early 2023, the VoltSite threat group compromised a U.S. water and electric utility and exfiltrated sensitive data. This data encompassed details on the operational process, the configurations of the operational technology, all of those different assets, geographical information system data, so they're looking for that, SCADA system configurations. They ended up exfiltrating a bunch of the data. And the utility actually took steps to bolster their cybersecurity posture in late 2023. They implemented the Dragos platform, and they kind of secured their IT/OT network traffic at the Purdue model levels 3 through 4 on the right-hand side, so between IT and OT. Additionally, the utility engaged OT Watch, which is our threat hunting group, and they wanted us to help identify whether they had any persistent threats inside the OT network. And that's when we confirmed the activity with VoltSite. And that VoltSite was in close proximity to their OT networks. I will say this, the VoltSite wasn't able to get into their OT, which was pretty awesome that they were that mature in their cybersecurity, so that was a good thing. But one thing we did see is that VoltSite continued pounding them and knocking at the door and trying to get into their system. So they're basically relentless in terms of what they were trying to do. And they're trying to hit all these different electric utilities. So with the information that we were getting from the FBI and CISA and the NSA, we have pretty much what we call moderate confidence that the initial compromise, that the data exfiltration and the proximity to the OT network, followed by VoltSite's continuous return to the network months later, highlights an intent to maintain that long-term persistence. And one of the things they did is they used all those living off the land techniques that we discussed earlier. What was really cool about this, in response to the event, we were able to see how the adversary was working, what steps they were taking to try to compromise their system. We were able to send that out to other utilities, both water and electrical. They were able to implement some of the things that we're showing here. They were able to actually find other activity, the VoltSite activity in other places. And by coming up with this information and learning what their behaviors are, we're able to send that same information to EISOC and other ISOCs like that, so that they can inform their community of what's going on. So I talked about the 5 CCs. The one thing I would use to combat this would be ICS network visibility and monitoring. By knowing what assets you have and monitoring the different protocols and what's going on, you can very quickly assess whether you might be compromised or somebody might be inside your system. Ganonite has a really pronounced focus on initial access and data exfiltration. You can see that they're in the oil and gas, transportation, logistics, and government. The big ICS impact they have is loss of confidentiality, theft of operational information, and espionage and exfiltration, similar to what we saw to VoltSite, but they're not really associated with North America. But how would we protect against them? Probably using defensible architecture, because they tend to go after the crown jewels. With the good defensible architecture, the network segmentation we talked about before, operational needs, and then monitor includes logging. Look at those logs, review those logs, keep logging your information. Lorionite is a very, very interesting group, and one of the things that I want to point out with Lorionite, so you can see they're working inside North America and the U.S. They really target manufacturing, aviation, government. They're looking for critical infrastructure at military bases, and they're looking for infrastructure at GIS emergency systems. And so one of the things they did was they were able to so if you have any ERP systems like Oracle or SAP, that's definitely a crown jewel of just about any company or industry. They were able to attack the Oracle e-business suite with the iSupplier and get access to external assets. One thing I will say about Lorionite is they look like they're a contractor that's running under VoltSite. So it looks like Lorionite is targeting these different industries and going after them, but VoltSite, who we were talking about earlier, the big one, they're using them as a contractor. The way to combat against this would be using a risk-based vulnerability management program. Again, identify your assets, look at your vulnerabilities, decide if there's enough risk with a vulnerability. Should you patch it? Should you let it go? Maybe there's a mitigating control you can do. So determine what the risk is and fix the issue. If it's deep enough, maybe you can just ignore it for some amount of time if it represents more risk than patching it at this point in time. And these last two, Kamacite and Electrum, I'll be pretty quick regarding these. We talked a little bit about Electrum already. Comicide, as you can see, they target oil and gas, LNG, maritime, electric, and manufacturing in both the Europe and United States. Electrum has been around for quite a long time, and they're continuously deploying these different wipers, so they're wiping out entire systems. And one way to get around Comicide would be, whoops, sorry about that. Comicide would be through using secure remote access on your critical OT environment. So multi-factor authentication, use jump hosts, focus on monitoring what's going in and out of your networks. I apologize, I know I'm moving fast, I'm running up against the clock here. A couple more slides. Wiper malware, you've seen the wiper malware, like there's been 7 or 8 different wiper malwares that have come out since the Ukraine. One of these was this, if you look at the very bottom, there's that acid rain, which was a cyber attack on the satellite modems and made them inoperable in the Ukraine. And that has been confirmed by the satellite company that actually occurred. That was a big one. We see wiper malware again with Electrum. They're using it quite a bit. Microsoft just reported recently on a new wiper that actually ends up killing the master boot record and overwrites it. And if you look at Caddy Wiper was one that was used by Electrum a bunch. Biggest thing to do here in terms of the 5 CCs is have a good ICS incident response plan. Know how you can restore your systems. Make sure your systems are back up. Make sure you test the backups so that you can get those systems back up and running. And do tabletop exercises. That's a great way to understand what you have and to train your employees so that they're familiar with what's going on. You don't want an incident to be the first day they bring out the incident response plan and start looking at it, and then they have to scratch their head trying to figure out what it's saying. So try to avoid that. And then finally, two other ones, Raspberry and Magellan. The important thing here is these groups kind of disappeared for a while, and then they were dormant, and then all of a sudden they reappeared. So what we're thinking of groups like Magellan and Raspberry is that they're going off. They've been giving directions to go in and specifically focus on some aspect of OT, learn about that OT, because, hey, we just compromised somebody's system. We want to know what's in there. We want to know how we can compromise it further. Go off, learn that, and then come back when you've done that. That's what those 2 threat groups are being used for. And then finally, just a summary of why should I care? Why should I care about my environments? Our OT environments are becoming increasingly homogenized. The adversaries' tool sets are becoming more capable. Threat groups are re-emerging, and it looks like they're starting to plan what they're doing. They're planning these attacks. They're staying in the systems for a long time. Think of Electrum. They're all sitting there gaining expertise. They're doing things like specializing and using separation of duties, and using other threat groups to access systems as if they were access brokers. They're looking at being persistent. Some of them are being repurposed, so these ransomware groups are being reused. We see this happening in Russia a bunch. And then there seems to be a lot of collaboration between groups and a lot of follow-on. Of course, the kinetic cyber aspects we talked about is really daunting. The use of hacktivists just to instill doubt inside inside people's minds, and then increase expertise use of tool sets. And just really quick on VoltSite. VoltSite this is the last comment I'll have. VoltSite the NSA and FBI both believe that Volt Typhoon is a threat group sponsored by China. They're currently performing huge recon on different systems. This group is looking for GIS systems for emergency response in major cities. If your business is doing anything around aviation-enabled fuel, power, military installations, VoltSite is looking for you. If you're near like a military base that has a quick reaction force, you know, if there's a conflict, we're going to send them out right now. That's really high on their target list. So military bases like Fort Campbell's are a good target. Any large city, New York, Chicago, Houston, LA, big target. Any midstream is a pretty high profile target for them. They're also going after maritime because they're trying to understand the fuel movement in and out of different places in North America and Guam. I wonder why China would pick Guam, but I think we all probably have a good good understanding of that. And what our feeling is what they're trying to do is keep us from getting in between them and Taiwan if there's any kind of conflict. And the way they would do this is not necessarily attack us like you would expect, but they would try to create a bunch of unrest inside the big cities. Instead of us being able to deploy the military, they're going to want to keep them at home. So if we have unrest, the military has to respond in kind. So this is one of those unusual things they're doing. Of course, they're going after the oil and gas, electric, water, kind of that trifecta of things to go out with. They want to disrupt operations. That's a big one on their list. And they're very persistent and very dedicated to doing just that. Sorry, I spit out a bunch, didn't I? Questions and answers? But if anyone has any questions, feel free to come up and ask me. And if I don't know the right answer, I'll get you somebody who does. And I was going to say download the year in review report, but I think we have the year in review report in our booth. Thanks, everyone.
We have a question.
Oh, do we have time?
Oh, it's a simple one, Rich.
Oh, was I going too fast?
When you're finding these threat groups out in the wild, we'll say facility X, do you find more than one, or is it typically just one?
So we have seen where there's been more than one threat group, and when that happens, what happens is we know there's more than one threat group because the first threat group cleans up behind them, and we see remnants of them cleaning up behind them when we find the next threat group. So that the living off the land techniques that we talked about, really good to stay hidden below the surface. They like to do the same things. If they don't want to leave any remnants around so that we can catch them, they try to clean up after themselves. Another reason why they're using brokers that are out there to gain initial access. They don't want to be seen as the threat group that is gaining access. They want to gain access afterwards and not let anybody know that they're there.